In Paraguay, soya has sown the seeds of a peasants' revolt. They're clashing with foreign farmers who they say are pushing them aside to plant this lucrative crop.
Oh my God, they had to cut Pedro open to get the bullets out.
And they're worried the chemicals used to help it thrive are poisoning them.
He says that soya has cost him a lot. In fact, it's cost him the life of his son.
Here, global business and peasant farmers come head-to-head in a battle over the world's food supply. We're in northern Paraguay, in the middle of South America. Peasant farmers are invading one of the country's many large soya farms.
This is completely illegal what these people are doing. And it's not just men, it's women here. It's children as well, holding sticks and holding sides. So what is the point of this occupation? Why are you doing it?
Gregorio told me this farm, like many others, was owned by foreigners, while Paraguayans have nowhere to grow food in their own country. He said a lot of peasant farmers, campesinos, had sold up, then found themselves without work. Suddenly a truck appeared.
Okay, whose is the truck? Whose is this truck?
Many of the big plantation owners are farmers from Paraguay's richer neighbor Brazil, tempted by cheaper land.
That's a truck belonging to the Brazilian soya farmer, and the campesinos here won't let them proceed. And in fact, they're reversing, they're going away, so far, a victory.
Then a pickup arrived. The campesinos told me they thought it was the soya farmer himself.
Are you the owner of this land? Can you translate? Are you the owner of this land? What do you think of this occupation?
But the campesinos were in no mood for discussion.
Things just got really nasty there. I was trying to speak to one of the soya farmers, the Brazilian. He didn't want to speak at all, and he got a very violent response from the campesinos here.
All around were signs that the campesinos intended to stay and farm the land for themselves.
La tierra paraguaya tiene que ser de los paraguayos, no de los extranjeros.
Myrna said Paraguayan land should be for Paraguayans, not for foreigners. She said that jobs were hard to find in Paraguay, so without land, her family would go hungry.
Myrna has 11 children, and she says she's joined this occupation because of them.
From the air, it's easy to see what's happening to Paraguay's landscape. Soya plantations dominate. It's industrial farming on a vast scale. The world needs more food, and Paraguay is being used to meet that demand.
It's just plantation after plantation. I mean, these fields are absolutely gigantic. At the moment, they're planted with winter crops, but in the summer, this would just be a sea of green.
Javier Aruli is an environmental campaigner opposed to the new soya industry.
What is wrong with growing soy?
Okay, first, there is nothing. It's not that we are attacking the plant. It's the model of agriculture. I mean, this soya is not even to feed the people here. It's to feed chicken and pigs in Europe and China. So it's crazy, so much land taken up, used for animal fodder, when people are poor in this country. You can see how much land has been taken up for the plantations. No people left. Where did these people go? The peasant, indigenous people that used to live in this forest.
We travelled deeper into the countryside. Our guides told us the land was being prepared for planting the next soya crop. I wanted to learn more about the fate of the peasant farmers.
Okay, well, we're just being taken to see an abandoned homestead. This was only abandoned last month, and it's going to be turned into a soya farm soon.
Antonio, a local campesino leader, knew the family who lived here. He said their experience was similar to many others.
Ellos hicieron contrato con los brasileros, arrendaron su terreno y después...
He said the Lopez family had been victims of a common ploy after they rented out some of their land to Brazilian soya farmers.
The soya farmers then said they couldn't rent the land anymore and instead pressurized them to sell up. And the family couldn't cope with the loss of income, so they were, in his words, forced to move.
Me siento muy triste.
Antonio said he felt sad and hopeless, but now the community was organizing resistance, he hoped things would change. As we drove, we passed through a landscape of protest, land occupations and campesino camps on the edge of vast soya plantations. 71-year-old Pedro Silva is another campesino activist. He showed me how his small farm had gradually become encircled by soya. He said he and his neighbors had occupied an adjacent field to stop the Brazilian soya farmer from expanding. Pedro resisted intense pressure to sell up, but he believes he's paid a terrifying price.
You were over there?
Pedro explained how one evening he was sitting in front of his house when suddenly 2 gunmen appeared from the bushes and shot him.
Oh my God. So how many times were you shot?
5 tiros se ya vi, güey.
5 times, he tells me. 4 times in the chest and once in the arm.
And the reason why the wounds still look so angry and raw is that he still has a bullet lodged in his chest. So you can see here that they had to cut Pedro open to get the bullets out. And you can see that there was massive bruising on his side.
Pedro's in no doubt that he was shot for his resistance. 2 Brazilians are currently awaiting trial for his attempted murder.
Pedro is saying that only the grace of God saved him because he was shot at such close range.
It wasn't soya season. In its place, we passed sunflowers and corn. Global demand for soya is insatiable. Much of it's turned into vegetable oil and animal fodder. But it's still not grown all year round. So it was the last thing we were expecting to see. Francisco, one of our local campesino guides, was shocked to see soya out of season.
It's really unusual to find soya at this time of year. This isn't the soya season at all. That's in the Paraguayan summer. The campesinos who are with me are really alarmed at seeing this because they say that they're afraid that it's some kind of experiment to see if soya can be grown in the wintertime.
Nearly all soya grown in Paraguay is genetically modified. It's bred to be resistant to certain weed killers so that fields can be sprayed to kill weeds. We headed for the region of Quaguaçu. I'd heard people there had other concerns about soya farming beyond its impact on their way of life. They feared its intensive use of chemicals also threatened their health. It wasn't hard to find anti-soya protests, even deep in the countryside.
These people aren't catering for an audience. No one's going to spot them out here. We're miles from anywhere. I'd like to ask all of you, do you think that soya has brought benefits for your community?
She said they get sick because of the soya, with stomach pains, diarrhea and vomiting. This man said children had been born with deformities. It was difficult to know what to make of these claims. We did discover that 2 of the chemicals applied to soya plants in Paraguay are banned in Europe. And we kept finding people with stories of reactions to the sprayings.
Hola.
Roberto Jimenez lives in a region engulfed by soya, with one field just meters away. He introduced me to his family.
Ese es Rocío.
Rocío.
Sí.
Hola. And you had another child as well?
Este puede de sufrir la enfermedad ya.
Dear. Terrible.
Jesús estaba ahí debajo de ese árbol estaba jugando. Sola fumigadora.
He's telling me that Jesus was just over there when they started spraying.
Al día siguiente él después pasar.
He said that the morning after the spraying, 3-year-old Jesus started to complain about irritation in his eyes. Then a rash appeared all over his body. Within 24 hours, he had serious breathing problems.
This is awful. You can see that Jesus' face is completely swollen up and sort of bruising around the eyes and the cheeks.
8 days after the crop spraying, Jesus died.
A nosotros nos afectó bastante porque a mí principalmente.
He said soya had cost them a lot. It had cost them the life of their son.
Me costó la vida de mi hijo ya.
We wanted to find out more about the health effects of crop spraying, so we headed to the capital, Asunción.
I've just arrived at a maternity and pediatrics hospital on the outskirts of the capital, and I'm about to meet a doctor who's been investigating the link between birth defects and agricultural chemicals that are used in soya farming. Hola.
Dr. Stella Benitez wanted me to see a baby with a serious birth defect.
This is the mother, is it, Stella?
Ella es la madre del bebé del recién nacido.
I found out the baby's mother, Rosa, grew up close to soya plantations.
Su cabeza
Dr. Benitez explained the baby boy had very serious medical complications.
This baby, Sabino, is only 1 month old, but Stella's telling me he has a head that's the size of a 9-month-old baby.
gran tumoración quístico.
The doctor showed me a scan of the baby's head.
Es quístico.
Stella's telling me that this dark patch here on the scan, this is the size of the cyst in Sabino's head.
Es grande. Poco cerebro, nada del cerebro, por ejemplo.
Because the cyst was so enormous, Sabino's brain had hardly developed. It means his chances of survival are slim.
Puede dar efectos por los
Dr. Benitez says such cases often have a common thread: exposure to farm chemicals.
How much were you exposed to the chemicals?
Rosa told me her family were exposed to what she calls poison all the time.
And she remembers that one time her brother went to work on the plantation next door and he became poisoned by the chemicals as well.
Dr. Benitez has studied over 130 cases of newborns with birth defects, looking for a link with exposure to pesticides.
El cerebro tiene afuera, ¿no? Es una gran malformación.
Stella's showing me a photograph of a baby with a gross deformity. The baby's been born with its brain outside its head. And this baby has lost an arm, hasn't got hands. Okay.
Fue un estudio de caso control.
Dr. Benitez found that mothers who'd lived within a kilometre of a sprayed field were twice as likely to have a baby with a birth defect. Her findings have been published in a respected American pediatrics journal. We'd seen evidence of violence being used in Paraguay's battle over land. We'd also heard claims of poisoning. But we hadn't heard from the other side, the Brazilian farmers who are spearheading the soya gold rush here. We were invited to meet a prominent Brazilian soya farmer. Ernie Schlinwein has been here for over 20 years and champions the use of the latest farming technology.
Look at that.
He's an enthusiastic supporter of GM crops.
Entonces es un poco parte de la semilla que vamos a sembrar en la próxima campaña.
These are the seeds that are going to be planted in the next season and be harvested the following year.
Ernie told us he farms 800 hectares. Everything is done by machines, and he only employs 2 people outside of his family. His farm is highly efficient and productive, but that means there are few jobs for Paraguayans.
There's a lot of anger and resentment amongst Paraguayan campesinos over the issue of land ownership here, isn't there?
Sí. Es justamente por esto.
Ernie told me the locals don't like the fact that the Brazilians are making a success of soya farming in Paraguay.
Ganas de mucho trabajo.
Well, he says that the immigrants come here with a lot of technology and they make a lot of money from their farming. What about the reports of babies being born with deformities in soya areas? Have you heard of those reports?
Acá eso no pasa esto.
He told me that the chemicals that were used wouldn't even harm a chicken.
He says they're not dangerous at all, and maybe there's been isolated incidents, but this region, he's convinced, hasn't seen anything like that.
When we asked the Paraguayan Soya Growers Association about the campesinos' claims of violence, they pointed to a long history of land struggle and said the peasants had been fairly compensated for their land. They said many had voluntarily sold land they received and accused some peasant leaders of exploiting the situation for their own ends. Paraguay is now the 4th largest exporter of soya in the world. The industry is worth $3 billion a year. And with food prices increasing globally, it's going to become ever more important and powerful. But the world's hunger for more soya has a very direct and sometimes violent impact on ordinary Paraguayans.
We've had word that things at a land occupation got really nasty last night, and a man was shot. And we've come to the hospital here in Asunción to find out what happened.
The victim's father took us to see his son. The police had shot 22-year-old Fidencio Velasquez in the stomach. He'd been part of a group that was occupying some farmland. Now he was fighting for his life.
Pero según la policía dice que le enfrentaron, que ellos también.
Fidencio's father, Vidal, accused the police of working on behalf of the soya farmers against the peasants.
The father's telling me that they think the police can probably say what they like because the police are so powerful. And who's going to listen to them? They're poor peasant people and they're powerless compared to the police.
I wanted to find out from the police why Fidencio had been shot. I'd heard members of his group were being held at a local police station. I asked to see them.
Can you tell me what happened when the police arrived?
4 sujetos que realizaron disparos hacia nosotros.
They told me the police had opened fire without warning. They complained they had been beaten up. Another prisoner said they'd been forced to occupy the land because they had none of their own.
He says, yes, they did invade property, and he says, so we are invaders in our own country, in Paraguay. And he says that no matter what, they will try and keep up the struggle.
The deputy chief, Ricardo Rojas, also agreed to talk to me.
Can you tell me what happened the other day?
Deputy Rojas read from a statement. He said the police only opened fire after they had been shot at, and later a police officer had been badly beaten up.
A lot of people that we've talked to have said that the police work in conjunction with, powerful soya farmers. Is there any truth in that?
No.
He denied any such collaboration.
The deputy chief is telling me that, contrary to what a lot of campesinos think, the police are not working in alliance with the powerful soya farmers. He says not the local police and nor the national police. And he says their job is just to protect the constitution of Paraguay. Well, it's really hard to know exactly what happened that night because there seems to be two very different versions of events. But what is clear is that it's soy and the demand for land that's the catalyst for the violence here.
As we prepared to leave Paraguay, the country was gearing up for a momentous occasion. There had been elections and the new president was about to be inaugurated.
Tens of thousands of peasants have descended on the capital from all over the country. They're here to celebrate the new president, Lugo. And there's a sense that this is their victory.
Fernando Lugo was elected because he promised the campesinos land. But he's also assured the soya farmers that private property is sacrosanct. We joined the crowds watching him being sworn in.
That's the new president of Paraguay. He's just been sworn in and he's making his first presidential procession.
The campesinos we spoke to warned if Lugo fails to deliver land soon, he'll become the enemy. But the new president faces a dilemma that's common to many developing countries. Paraguay has become reliant on soya and the global food business. And the hard truth is, the global food business doesn't need peasant farmers.
Next Friday at 7:30, Unreported World travels to the Philippines, where a war over control of the country's resources is raging between rich and poor. A Place in the Sun, home or away next on 4.
Soya farmer and the campesinos here won't let them proceed. And in fact, they're reversing, they're going away, so far a victory.
Then a pickup arrived. The campesinos told me they thought it was the soya farmer himself.
Are you the owner of this land? Can you translate? Are you the owner of this land? What do you think of this occupation?
But the campesinos were in no mood for discussion.
Things just got... So what is the point of this occupation? Why are you doing it?
Necesitamos tierra
Gregorio told me this farm, like many others, was owned by foreigners, while Paraguayans have nowhere to grow food in their own country. He said a lot of peasant farmers, campesinos, had sold up, then found themselves without work. Suddenly a truck appeared.
Okay, whose is the truck? Whose is this truck?
Many of the big plantation owners are farmers from Paraguay's richer neighbor Brazil, tempted by cheaper land.
That's a truck belonging to the Brazilian.
In Paraguay, soya has sown the seeds of a peasants' revolt. They're clashing with foreign farmers who they say are pushing them aside to plant this lucrative crop.
Oh my God, they had to cut Pedro open to get the bullets out.
And they're worried the chemicals used to help it thrive are poisoning them.
He says that soya has cost him a lot. In fact, it's cost him the life of his son.
Here, global business and peasant farmers come head to head in a battle over the world's food supply.
Really nasty there. I was trying to speak to one of the soya farmers, the Brazilian. He didn't want to speak at all, and he got a very violent response from the campesinos here.
All around were signs that the campesinos intended to stay and farm the land for themselves.
La tierra paraguaya tiene que ser de los paraguayos, no de los extranjeros.
Myrna said Paraguayan land should be for Paraguayans, not for foreigners. She said that jobs were hard to find in Paraguay, so without land, her family would go hungry.
Myrna has 11 children, and she says she's joined this.
We're in northern Paraguay, in the middle of South America. Peasant farmers are invading one of the country's many large soya farms.
This is completely illegal what these people are doing. And it's not just men, it's women here, it's children as well, holding sticks and holding scythes.